These crops look perfect, but what if something goes wrong? The growing environment in the field is extremely dynamic and complex. What worked last year may not work this year, or a herbicide you've used safely for years for some reason injures the crop this year. When something happens, the customer will look to his vendors, you, for answers. Is it nutrient deficiency or something else? Diagnosing a problem is often tough, so I always start with the basics. I ask questions and dig, ask questions and look. It's oftentimes helpful to have the customer out in the field with you while you're doing your diagnosis. Ask him questions while you're there. Ask to see the soil tests. Ask about traits, herbicides, soil insecticides, etc. Be polite, but also be persistent. It oftentimes takes a lot of questioning and discussion to discover the issue's source. So let's say you get an urgent call from a customer, and this is what you encounter. There's gaps in the stand, significant ones. Is this a planter problem? Is it an injury? Is it an insect? Or is this something else? In this case, it was an in-furrow fertilizer rate that had been safe for years, but then this spring, temperatures stayed in the 40s and 50s for several days after planting into dry soil conditions. The grower had planted 2 to 2¼ inches deep to find moisture in dry soil, slowing emergence even more and thereby possibly making the fertilizer burn worse. Let's go through some examples now to illustrate how important it is to know symptomology. Let's start with this. Do you know what this is? Yep, this is light frost injury. This plant will recover just fine. Okay then, this must be frost injury too then. Actually no, this is very mild injury from an interaction between a herbicide and an insecticide, such as Callisto and Lorsban. Often symptoms will mimic something else. This looks like a deficiency of some kind, right? Possibly zinc? This is injury from a herbicide that carried over from the soybean crop the year before. Clomazone is a pigment inhibitor causing the bleached effect on this plant. Once in a while, there's a real head scratcher. I first encountered these symptoms 15 years ago in a client's field where corn was no-tilled into wheat stubble. It was only after a lot of questions and discussions with the grower that we finally figured out what happened. Have you ever seen this before? This is from tiny, sublethal doses of Roundup or glyphosate that found its way to the growing point just prior to emergence. As the leaves then unfolded as the plant was growing, this was the visual result. This is another example of mimicry. It looks an awful lot like an ALS herbicide injury. Do you know what this is? Severe manganese deficiency. Well, this looks like manganese deficiency, like in the previous slide, right? But then why is the middle plant okay? This is an ALS herbicide injury that I occasionally encountered from a product called Basis. The wild card here was the inconsistent planting depth, causing the slightly shallower plants to absorb just a little bit too much. Sometimes the smallest variable can have large impacts. Sometimes these variables are so small, it's hard to believe the amount of their impact. Everyone knows what purple corn is, right? This looks like a no-brainer. This again illustrates that it may not be what it first seems to be. Here's another example. Take a moment to look at each picture and think about what it could be. This is where detective work comes into play. There are many factors that cause leaf rolling. Are these plants affected by a nutrient deficiency, an injury from a herbicide, or a disease? The metolachlor, or dual injury, most likely occurred from cold, wet conditions at emergence. The calcium and boron deficiency symptoms could be confirmed through soil testing and plant tissue analysis. If you scout fields long enough, sooner or later, you're going to see something like this. Any guesses as to what this is? Is it a deficiency? The first time I saw this one, I was really puzzled. Until one day I was in a seed plot with a seed company agronomist, and we saw one of these, and he knew what it was. This is white stripe, actually just a genetic abnormality. If you've been around a while, you'll get this one right away. For those of you who are new in the game, this could be puzzling. Is this a micronutrient deficiency? If so, what do you think it might be? This is actually a fairly common injury, but it seldom causes yield loss. Banville, or dicamba, is a growth regulator, and it takes very, very, very tiny amounts to cause rather dramatic effects on the soybean plant. Again, deficiencies often look like each other, but can manifest themselves a little differently, hybrid to hybrid, field to field, or year to year. What nutrient deficiency is this? Are these two examples of the same thing? No. The photo on the left shows a very similar intraveinal chlorosis like sulfur or zinc deficiency, but actually it's a herbicide tank contamination injury to non-Liberty Link corn. Intraveinal chlorosis can be caused by many things, including deficiencies and herbicide injury. See if you can figure out what's happening in these pictures for a moment before I reveal the answers. Top left is iron deficiency. The bottom left is sulfur deficiency. The top right is something different. You see the intraveinal chlorosis there, but you also notice there's something going on with the midrib, and you see that rust color. It almost looks like the midrib is beginning to deteriorate. And that is, in fact, the big clue, the reddish or rust-colored midrib. A rust-colored midrib is almost always from a herbicide injury, not a nutrient deficiency. In this particular case, this is from fomesafen, a soybean herbicide that carried over. Symptoms from one problem can often mimic something else, and don't always look exactly the same. For example, there may be differences in how hybrid A exhibits a deficiency versus hybrid C. Are these pictures the same problem? Nope. But field experience adds up over time, and subtle differences become easier to sort out. Injury and deficiencies can both be greatly influenced by other factors and interactions with crop inputs. Here are different manifestations of the same thing. What's going on in these plants? This is the result of the plant unable to fully metabolize both an ALS herbicide and an organophosphate soil insecticide. Soil pH has a great effect on the activity of herbicides, and herbicide injury and carryover often increases with increasing pH. Sometimes you really have to look closely and know both nutrient deficiency symptoms and herbicide injury symptoms. What's going on in these photos? That's classic manganese deficiency on the left, but it's an ALS injury on the right. A big clue are the red veins on the underside of the leaf. This is usually from an ALS inhibitor such as Pinnacle, Harmony, Classic, and so on and so forth. Always look at the underside of those soybean leaves. When encountering a problem in the field, the causes are not always easy to discover. Ask questions and keep learning about the field history. Planting date and depth, tillage, seed traits, herbicides, and so on and so forth. The soil parameters are also very important. The pH, cation exchange capacity, organic matter, texture, these greatly affect both nutrient deficiencies and herbicide injury potential. Dig plants and examine the root system. Is it restricted by compacted soil? Sometimes purple corn is actually caused by restricted root system, even in soils that are very high in phosphorus. Is the plant damaged by grubs, nematodes, stalk borers, etc.? And then what was the fertilizer program, and when were the nutrients applied, and were the rates appropriate for the soil tests? And as always, the agronomists and sales agronomists here at Agro-Liquid are ready to help. My contact information is here, and I appreciate your time in watching this video today.